2011 meeting of the joint meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority. Can we have a roll call for the council, please?
Council members: Manukian.
Here.
Najarian. Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Friedman.
Here.
And a roll call for the Housing Authority.
Authority members: Friedman.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Najarian. Farazian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Quintero.
Here.
Next item, please.
The agenda for the May 24, 2011 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, May 19, 2011 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before these two bodies this afternoon is the Director of Community Development regarding financial update and adjustments to the adopted 2010-2012 Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Budget. At 1A is Council Resolution appropriating $2 million to provide additional appropriation for direct and portable voucher housing assistance payments, HAP expense. And 1B is authority motion to receive and file the report.
Good afternoon, council members, housing authority members, Mr. Starbird and staff. Staff is here.
Was this emailed to me? Was this sent to me electronically?
It's
Yes,
emailed
it
to all
was.
of us.
It was?
Yes, it was.
And who sent it?
I sent it.
And-
Williams is the last name.
Thank you.
By the way, I really appreciated your sending that.
You-
It's helpful. And
Thank you. Staff is here this afternoon to recommend that City Council adopt a resolution to appropriate $2 million to the current Housing Assistance Fund in order to meet the housing assistance payments through June 30th of this year. If you want to go over the slides, we can do that, and it'll just give you some visual guidance as to where we're at. This screen shows what were authorized by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is 1592 vouchers, and we're currently leased at 1536. Our portable housing vouchers that we administer is 1485.
Madam Mayor, if I can, before we leave that first slide, if we can go back. Cindy, to be clear then, we have 56 vouchers that we are not letting out, correct?
That's correct. We have 56 vouchers that we're not utilizing at this time.
This budget situation.
Because of the budget situation, the shortfall of money that we haven't received.
That's the import of these numbers. You see the portables, which is a separate issue, but the important point here is there are 56 vouchers that if HUD was providing adequate funding, or frankly if we had adequate reserves, we could be issuing 52 more vouchers. But because of this issue she'll be describing, we have held issuing any further vouchers.
This next slide will show the different types of revenues that we receive from HUD. The first one is the housing assistance payments, and these payments are committed to our agency through an annual contributions contract. And then the administrative fees, which are provided to our housing authority for the number of vouchers that we lease. They break it down two ways. The first column is for the first 600 vouchers that are leased through the calendar year, and then the column B is for the remaining vouchers. And then HUD, after they determine what the administrative fees are for each agency, then they apply a proration factor of 92%. So those figures are actually lower than what we actually receive. The estimated and actual versus the actual funding, this gives you a timeline of where we began last year in May of 2010 when we started preparing for the fiscal year budget, and we had adopted, the budget was adopted at $24.3 million, and then in June we were notified by the HUD office what our funding was going to be for the Glendale vouchers, and that was a little over $100,000 more than what we had anticipated receiving. And then in April of this year, that is when we determine what our projected estimates, expenditures, and were going to be for both the portable vouchers and for the Glendale vouchers. So the bottom graph will represent, this actually groups the two programs together, the Glendale vouchers and the portable vouchers. So the bottom graph shows that that the adopted budget and revenue and expenditures were 24.3, and with the new HUD budget that they told us what we were going to get after the budget was adopted, and the revenue that we receive to reimburse us for the portable vouchers is the middle graph, and then the top graph is what we're expecting to spend, which is 26.3. This next graph represents what our the blue columns is what our HAP expenditures are. This is what we're actually spending on the Glendale vouchers, and then the pink line graph is what is the money that is being funded to us by HUD. And if you see a little spike there in December, that is because at the end of the calendar year in December, HUD determined that there was additional funding to be given to the different agencies, and so they gave us an additional $78,000, and that was because there was additional money available to disperse among the different agencies. This slide will show where we anticipate getting the appropriated funding sources. The very top is what we underestimated in our HUD revenue for this fiscal year. It's $100,000. The middle graph will show that money will be coming from our reserves, our net restricted assets, and our unrestricted net assets. The restricted assets are housing assistance payments, it's our admin reserves, and the unrestricted is from our administrative fees. So the money will be coming out of both of those funds. And then the very bottom graph is what will be reimbursed by the portable vouchers that we will be administering. And then the final screen is just what the possible effects will be if we continue to get budget shortfalls in the coming years. The first one is we're already applying that. We're not issuing vouchers as they become available. The second one is if we have to start terminating program participants so that we can meet our budget. Is there any questions?
Mr. Manukian?
Just right off, completely opposed to terminating the existing participant, just so everyone is clear on my position. Second, could you, again, the audio is not very clear and there's a lot of echo in the room, and I did not understand the difference, not the difference, but which funds were undesignated and the designated funds. Could you go over that again, please?
The net restricted assets is our reserves from our housing assistance payments. This is the money that we haven't used up for our housing assistance payments.
And how much is that? Is that the $500,000 that we're taking?
Yes, that's correct.
Coming from the restricted funds.
That's coming from the restricted funds. That's correct.
And we have $3.5 million of unrestricted admin fees.
That's correct.
How did we accumulate so much admin fees?
By having a good lease-up rate and just...
Are we not paying our employees enough?
We're not using all the money that we're eligible for.
Okay. Can we transfer some of that money? Does it have to sit there? Because when the admin fees are old admin fees, then it should either be used or...
Well, actually, we have the benefit here. The reason we don't have to essentially begin to cut people, and we may have some additional cushion next year, is because of the admin fee reserve. I recall a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, HUD actually came in, and I'll call it raided, my word, raided the assistance payment reserves. We had also done a good job and had built up reserves on the actual housing assistance payments as well. Now that reserve is down to about $500,000.
Correct.
But we had actually built up, how big was it, Peter, do you recall, or Cindy?
I believe
million?
they took $1.4 million.
Okay. They came in and took that money away. Now, there can always be a fear they might do that with the admin money too, but they didn't take the admin money. As I've come to understand it, the benefit of having some level of reserves is to offset these kinds of fluctuations, either budget vagaries because of HUD's way of really getting budget approvals and paying you after the fact, or, as is our case, you may have variations in the income of the participants, which is kind of the case here.
If I'm frowning, please forgive me. These lights
Okay.
are really giving me a headache.
The
Sorry.
rest of us are getting used to it. We're half blind
Okay.
now. So
Thank you.
as I understand it, in this case, we have a number of dynamics that are affecting us. One is that we're seeing income levels go down generally, and yet rents are staying the same.
Right.
So the gap between income and rent is getting bigger. So the program is having to backfill more. So it's costing
Right,
more.
I understand now.
In addition, then there's the vagaries of the federal budget program. So inasmuch as we've been able to save a good portion of our admin, we can use that now to begin to buffer ourselves from having to actually...
That's my next question. Since it's undesignated and we don't have to necessarily, in case it comes to that, of letting
Right, exactly. It gives us
existing-
that buffer. The staff's last solution is to cut people off. That's the last thing we want to do. So think of the vouchers that we haven't issued kind of as our hiring freeze here in the city. That gives us a cushion. In addition is the admin money, the reserve that we have sitting there that we can also use. But one of the concerns that I have is going into the next full fiscal year, that admin reserve could get eaten up pretty quickly depending
Right.
on the allocation from HUD. And that's what we have to watch very carefully so we don't get in a situation where our reserves have been depleted and essentially, even though we have held some vouchers aside, we may be in a condition of having to reduce people's participation in the program.
I
That's what we have
just
to
don't
avoid.
want the federal government to take that money.
Well, we don't
And
either.
then,
We don't
right,
either.
so I want to make sure that that money is available for
We haven't
emergencies.
heard any rumblings about that?
Mr. Chair, Quintero, members of the Housing Authority, we've heard rumblings off and on. HUD has, as we discussed earlier, HUD's previous action was to take away funding and then ask agencies to make up that gap
With their
using their reserves. They did it through the HAP reserves. We've been told that they can't touch the admin reserve, but I don't necessarily. I believe if it comes to a situation of future funding gaps, they might be able to come in and touch that admin reserve. We need to maintain a certain level of reserves for making our monthly payments, rather than having to use any of the city's non-Section 8 funds to cover those checks until we get reimbursed. These reserves serve that purpose. We are also looking at ways in which we might be able to utilize some of those reserves for some streamlining of operations that might alleviate the wait list, that might create some vacancies on the program in ways other through attrition, and that's something we're going to discuss next week when we talk about the waiting list. We did hear, and another thing is that we're not proposing terminations of any applicants right now. We just put that on the in the staff report just to make everyone aware that if worse comes to worse, that might be the final option. But HUD, at the same time, HUD has also said they wouldn't necessarily allow terminations of program participants as long as agencies have any type of reserve funds. So HUD is almost gearing agencies to burn through their reserve funds before they'll allow terminations. What we're really trying to do, and what we really need to do in the next 3 months, HUD has settled the 2011 budget 2 months ago, but they have until mid-June to announce to us what our funding levels will be. We want to be able to wait, take a look at what those funding levels will be for the program, compare them to our projected expenditures, and then see if we can project what next year's gap might be, and then look at proposing ways other through attrition to lower our voucher size to a level that equals the revenue that we're receiving from HUD.
That timing issue is also, I wanted to understand it better because in the report it states that the HUD funding is determined annually on a calendar basis, and we're making adjustment mid-year. Why is that happening? Why do they determine their funding level on a calendar year, and here we are in May making adjustments for HUD funding? Isn't it clear what we let's say for
No.
2010 and 2011, it's not clear?
No, it's
What we'll
not.
be getting?
No, it's not. When we are projecting...
For
when-
2010, it's clear though, right? 2010, it's done, or they're still up in the air?
2010 it was only recently settled
Okay.
with HUD. And so we're going to get the final numbers on that.
So-
It might be the case that we might come back 3 weeks from now with the adjusted HUD budget and say there's a further impact and might have to take a look at additional funding.
But for us, that would likely be for the 11-12 fiscal year.
Correct.
So their calendar, we're fiscal, which causes that.
So the fact that they set their budgets annually on a calendar year basis has no bearing on the timeline.
You still have to operate on a fiscal year basis, so they're always having.
Right, that I know, but in terms of the amount that we're going to get from them.
And as he notes, we don't get good numbers on their calendar year 11 until about June.
Correct.
So even that's 6 months behind when they adopt a budget.
We're only aware for 6 months of certainty of what our budget is, and the remaining 6 months we're not aware. And this particular year was because of the stalled budget negotiations and settlement, we were further behind.
Even when they
the timeline.
adopt a budget, they still make adjustments during the year as well?
Correct. HUD can do
Or because that's what you were referring to earlier, right?
HUD can do that as well.
Right. So they adopt a budget and then mid-year they make adjustments, so they could be adjusting it down as well, right?
Yes.
Not necessarily more, it's less. It could be
Correct.
less, especially this year.
Correct. It's certainly not a science.
Okay.
Now, and it causes a lot of agencies to be able to, or to have to be able to make adjustments in midstream. And as we've talked before, it's very difficult on a program like this to be able to make adjustments. Attrition is really the easiest way without an impact to the client basis to be able to make monetary adjustments to the program.
Because
But
you
it
could
takes a while.
also burn through your reserves pretty quickly. If
Right.
you leased up completely and relied on your reserves, then you may reach a point where you're having to essentially take people off the program, because you could burn through $3.5 million in reserves pretty quickly.
Right. What is the chances of the additional 50 being funded at one point this year?
I would say that there's, if anything, that we might have to reduce that 1536 number down to a new revised number to equal what we think we're going to be receiving in the next 2 weeks from HUD's announcement.
So the chances are nil that we'll get additional funding to fund the additional 56.
This particular year, yes, we think it.
In addition, as Peter notes, as people come off, we have an average of how many people come off the program in a year.
About 6 per month.
6 per month. We won't issue any more. If in May and June and July and August we get 6 a month, that'll give us 24 more. We'd hold those as well until we start to get a clearer picture of whether we could actually begin to fill those. That gives us that first cushion against any of the vagaries, backed up by our reserves.
Thank you. Could we have, as soon as you get information on their budget, I know you are monitoring the 2012 budget. As soon as you get information on it, could you send us the information? Usually do, but
And as soon as we get the information, we're going to try to look at it and see what next steps we might.
Okay.
Some of this discussion.
okay. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from anybody else? I have one card, Herbert Milano.
Here.
Mayor Friedman, members of the City Council and Housing Authority, my name is Herbert Molano. I'd like to pose a couple of questions, if I may, with regard to this issue. I do have some experience with regard to Section 8. I only have 2 tenants who are receiving now Section 8. And since I know my tenants personally, I have a sense of what is taking place out there for at least the individuals that I come face to face with. There is true that there is a significant reduction in income for those individuals who are, especially who are not who don't have a steady financial income stream. And I believe that landlords, as I have, we reduce our rents to sort of accommodate for the fact that those tenants who have limited income and had their income situation become worsened, that we needed to adjust to that reality. And it is my question that perhaps given the status of the economy, I think that landlords would rather reduce the rents further and accommodate. And I don't know if they've been approached yet, or maybe you can take out a program to address it to landlords to see if they would be willing to accommodate it. The other concept I'd like to bring up is, can a proportional reduction be done across the board so as to prevent the potential of anyone being completely cut off from Section 8? I think the reality of the economy for a lot of these tenants is pretty precarious. And I don't know if a reduction, of $30, $50 might impact them too severely, but I think that if it's done across the board, it might be an opportunity to salvage some of these Section 8 vouchers for very needed tenants. The other question that I have is with regard to the administrative costs. To what extent have the pension changes of 2005 impacted the administrative costs of this program? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I may...
Excuse me for a minute. Did you have a question for...
Yeah, what do you mean by across-the-board reductions? What do you mean by across-the-board reduction? We reduce everyone's Section 8?
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah. I don't know if that's possible,
Okay.
but if we are... But my thinking is that if your choices are knocking people off 100% for their program, or basically proportionally reducing it. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Zobak, if we got to the point where we were going to be terminating a lot of people, is that a possibility to reduce benefits across or would that not be something that you would recommend?
There's a strict formula that HUD requires us to utilize when we're calculating someone's housing assistance payment. So you must use that formula. You can't just say, well, you're entitled to $500, but we're only going to pay $400.
Right.
So what you have to then do is actually look at an entire household and propose a termination to be able to make up a funding gap. So you can't necessarily do that. The other comment with regards to whether or not there's been an approach.
Before we move on to the next comment, as I understand from staff report and conversations, though, you do have some latitude in how you begin to set priorities, if indeed you reach the point where people need to be removed from the program. Different alternatives you may have on what income you count toward their income. So if we get to that point, you'd want to have a long conversation about the various options we may have for reducing the program. I don't want to get the community too concerned about this issue yet. I mean, I don't want to be crying fire in a crowded room at this point. It's just something we need to be aware of, and as the numbers progress, we may have to have more study sessions to talk about, if indeed the worst case comes, how we'd be dealing with it. But again, if we keep the issuance of vouchers frozen, hopefully we'll generate more cushion, and we'll still have some portion of our administrative reserve that can also serve as a buffer, and we'll keep you apprised of the budget. I hate to get too far into this discussion of what would we do, because there are a lot of options, and I hate to get people thinking at this point they're going to be cut from their Section 8 housing, or we'll have lots of calls into the city, and we're not there yet.
And we're not anywhere close to that yet.
No.
Mr. Zobak, you had a thought?
Was with regards to whether or not an apartment owner could voluntarily, will voluntarily. Whether or not an apartment owner would voluntarily decrease their rents for the sake of the program, would be something, as Mr. Starbird mentioned, we would want to look at a time that we would be presenting to the authority a list of options to consider, kind of a hierarchy of how you would propose termination for clients. It's not something we've done in the past. I don't think it's something that a majority of the landlords would necessarily be interested in doing, to be honest.
On that note, the staff that works with the case managers who work with the residents, I'm just curious, how often do we see accommodations being made when income levels are going down?
Once in a while there are made. The tenants would advocate, or the housing advisors advocate on the tenant's behalf. If we have a tenant that comes in that has a voucher and says, I found this unit, here's what the price is, we run it through the HUD calculation, and we might say, your owner is asking $50 more than what we have the ability to pay and what HUD allows you to pick up as the difference. In a lot of cases, we would call the owner and negotiate, discuss with them the issue, what the problem is, and then sometimes we get owners that would voluntarily decrease the rent to be able to initiate the tenancy for the tenant.
Are there any other questions? Laura?
My question is about working families. Let's say the family of 3 or 4, just one person is working in the family getting income. Let's say that the person is laid off after a certain time of getting collecting the unemployment. He or she can find a job, and so no income anymore. So what is going to happen to the household? Are they getting to be eliminated, or what? Do you get what I'm asking?
If a client on the program already is experiencing a decline in income,
Loses all income.
Job.
Loses a job and then eventually loses the unemployment income.
they would
They
report.
no longer have revenues for the family. What happens to
They
them?
would report to us what their income change has been. We'll run it through the HUD formula, and then obviously, in this particular case, it sounds like our housing assistance payment would increase considerably to make up for that gap.
So they would not be terminated from the
So
program.
people
No,
are
they
not
wouldn't be
taken off the
terminated from the
program
program.
because they have no income.
Right.
If you have no income, it just means that we pay more, correct?
Thank you.
Do you consider like unemployment insurance in the formula?
Unemployment insurance we count as income. And if in the case where the family loses their job, they've exhausted all their unemployment benefits, and they still haven't been able to find a job, we would encourage them to apply for any other type of government assistance that they would be eligible for. And if there is nothing out there for them, then typically we would pay the entire rent for that family until their circumstances changed.
Okay, do we have a motion? There are no other questions?
Fair motion?
There are two motions.
Can we make them both at a time? or-
No, one's council, one's housing authority.
Right. Okay. I'll move 1A.
For
Council.
council.
For council, 1A is council.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call, please?
Council members Menuchyan,
Yes.
Najarian, Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Friedman.
Yes.
I'll move 1B for housing.
Second?
Roll call.
Authority members Friedman,
Yes.
Menuchyan,
Yes.
Incy,
Yes.
Najarian, Farazian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Quintero.
Yes.
Okay, can we have a motion to adjourn for the council?
So moved.
And a motion to adjourn for the housing authority. You are adjourned.